This is Dr. Mark Hitchcock here from my office at Faith Bible Church in Edmond, Oklahoma, and I want to thank you for joining us for another episode of Marking the Times. It's Friday today, the day after Thanksgiving. I hope you had a wonderful time yesterday as you gathered together with family and friends to give thanks to God for all of His blessings to us. God's blessed us greatly as individuals, as families, our church, but also our nation as well. And so it's wonderful to have a time of Thanksgiving. And now we're headed into the Advent season. It's one of my favorite times of the year. I love preaching and teaching and thinking about the coming of Christ into the world. I want to answer a question today. Again, you can send in your questions on our Facebook page, but I'll answer a question about the timing of resurrection in the future, about those who will come back to life. And some time ago, I gave a teaching about the timing of the resurrection of Old Testament saints. And again, not to rehearse all of that, but my view is that the rapture of the church someday when the Lord comes, those who've died during this church age will be resurrected. Those of us who are alive will be caught up together in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. So that'll happen for church age believers, but I think that Old Testament saints won't be resurrected until the end of the tribulation period. And so in light of that, I've received this question. He says, I have a question that comes from your broadcast on resurrection of saints. I've always been taught and understood that in Peter, and I think he's referring here to 1 Peter chapter 3, that when he describes Jesus on Saturday after the cross, that Jesus visited those in Hades to reveal himself and preach to those Old Testament saints who longed for his coming. At that point, their souls left Hades to join him in heaven. That understanding seems to me at least to advocate for the Old Testament saints' resurrection earlier than his return. Now again, the passage that's being referred to here is in 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 18 to 22, one of the most difficult passages in the New Testament. So I'm not going to take time to give all the views on it. I'll just give the view that I hold. And the view that I hold here is it says that Jesus, when he died, he was put to death in the flesh, verse 18, but he was made alive in the spirit. So Jesus' body died, but in the spirit he was still alive. And it says, in which he went and made proclamation to the spirits in prison. So in his spirit, Jesus then went and made proclamation to these spirits in prison. Now the spirits in prison here, I take it, are demonic spirits. I think they're demonic spirits who sinned back in Genesis chapter 6. The reason I say that is, and you can look some of this up on your own, but the word spirits, when it's used this way without any other identifier, is never used of people. It's always used of angelic beings or demonic spirits. And so when he went and made proclamation to the spirits in prison, I believe that refers to these demons that sinned back in Genesis 6. And it's interesting, if you look at 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4, Peter mentions Tartarus, some angels that were consigned to a place called Tartarus, which was the lowest part of the underworld. So since Peter in 2 Peter mentions angels consigned in Tartarus, and here he mentions these spirits in prison, I think he's talking about the same group. And it says, who once were disobedient when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah. So these particular group of fallen angels or demons sinned even further back in Genesis 6, and so God consigned them to Tartarus. And between his death and resurrection, Jesus goes down to Tartarus, the lowest part of the underworld, and proclaims there to those demonic spirits his victory that he has achieved at the cross. So that's what I think this passage is talking about. I don't think he went down there to preach to people in Hades to take them back to heaven with him. A couple other passages, let me just mention about the resurrection of Old Testament saints. In Daniel 12, verse 1, it says this, Now at that time Michael the great prince, who stands guard over the sons of your people, will arise, and there will be a time of distress, such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time, and at that time your people, everyone who is found written in the book, will be rescued. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, these to everlasting righteousness, but others to disgrace and everlasting contempt. So notice here the resurrection is placed right after this terrible time of trouble. It's going to be a time of trouble that's never occurred on the earth. That's the tribulation period. So the resurrection of Old Testament saints is placed after that time of tribulation. One other passage, you can again look this up and read it on your own, but is Isaiah chapter 26 and verse 18 says this, We were pregnant, we writhed in labor. We gave birth as it seems only to wind. We could not accomplish deliverance for the earth, nor were inhabitants of the world born. If you read before that, it's talking again about the time of tribulation for Israel. And then verse 19 says, your dead will live, their corpses will rise. You who lie in the dust, awake and shout for joy, for your dew is as the dew of the dawn, and the earth will give birth to the departed spirits. So there in Isaiah chapter 26, verse 19, again, the resurrection of Old Testament saints is placed after this great time of distress or trouble that's going to come on the earth. So those are a couple of clear passages, I think, that put the resurrection of Old Testament saints at the end of the tribulation. And I wouldn't use 1 Peter chapter 3 to support the idea of an earlier resurrection for Old Testament saints. Well, hopefully that doesn't muddy things up anymore. Hopefully it'll clarify that issue of timing a bit for you. Anyway, thank you for joining us again. I appreciate it very much. God bless you. Have a good week. We'll see you next time.